99.9% of everything we're going to talk about this week is free on my website. There's no new revelations here. None. One of you that I had one-on-one time yesterday with, you said, that's not how I learn best. He was alluding to the fact he learns best by being there with the person. 99.9% of all the people that have used the QLA model successfully, I've never met. I would know if they floated down through the ceiling, I'd probably believe them. I'd ask for ID though. I'd ask for ID even if they floated through the ceiling. But you're here for another reason. You're here for another reason. And that reason normally is because lack of self-esteem, lack of self-worth, lack of self-confidence, and I can go down the list, right? And again, I beat it all week. And who do you have to hold accountable to that ugly fact, or who's responsible? Your parents. And normally it's one parent more than another because very few people have are raised equally by two parents. Normally one is out working, blah, 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 bullshit. You've heard all this. This is not new. But for the truth of the matter is, and what Tom Cruise is alluding to in this screaming and ranting and raving exchange with Jack Nicholson, see, he wants answers. You want answers. That's why you're here. But you've already been given the answers, but subconsciously you don't like what you read. Subconsciously you don't like what you read. Subconsciously you don't like what you heard on the tapes. For years and years and years and years, it was difficult for people to relate to, QLA, because I'm not a Dan Peña. I'm not an alpha male. I'm all kind of bullshit, right? And then now, after decades of producing successes, a la winning some successes in this room, you now realize that 98% of all the high-performance people in the world are introverts, which I'm certainly not. 98% of all the high-performance people in the world lack self-esteem and lack self-confidence. That certainly doesn't cover me. And we're going to talk, a couple of you have young kids and asked about raising young kids. And we talk about that. And we talk about the book that by serendipity my mother picked up in 1946 in the Reader's Digest form. And the Reader's Digest form is a condensed form. As she was going out of the bonds market, you know how they have a point of price or whatever you call it when you buy gum and shit at the register? There was a Reader's Digest of the book, Dr. Spock's book on raising kids in 1946. Since 1946 until he died in 1995, it was the second most published book in history behind the Bible. 55 million copies. 55 million copies. And I was raised with that book. If my mother was sick or didn't go to the fucking market, I don't know. But nobody in this room was raised with that book. I've never had anybody in this seminar that their parent, in 27 and a half years, that their parents used that book as a foundation to raise their children. Yet it sold 55 million copies. But when you look at it, 55 million since 1946, we've got 7.6 or 7.7 billion people on the earth now. It's not impossible to believe that fact. But you're going to hear the truth. How it resonates with you and how it resonates with the last group or how it will resonate with the next group is depending on you and how you were taught. My parents, especially my father, always told me, it's not what happens to you in life, and Dan, it's how you interpret what happens to you in life. And I've had a lot of shit happen to me, and somehow I always thought it was good. Even when, gee, Dan, Jesus Christ, like I've just had tragic news about some deaths to people that are, one very close to me, and one who helped me get started in my career. And I've always looked at it, well, fuck, what can I learn from this? I don't go through that process. Now, Dan, so-and-so just died, what can I learn from this? But that's how I process information. Whereas you don't process information that way. And that's why accountants, lawyers, and I went through the litany of people that it's harder for, because you're educated in a different way. This is not a linear deal. This is not linear. This is not 2 plus 2 equals 4. This is 2 to the 50th power times 2 to the 5,000th power. It's geometric. And for those of you that have never been around high performers, and for those of you that have never been through or part of a high-performance team, you don't know what I'm talking about. Most people in this room, I'm the closest thing that vis-a-vis social distancing, that you've been to a high-performance person in your life, other than maybe you were on a university basketball team or a college wrestling team or something like that, where you had one guy and or one gal who was a super high performer. Which says mountains, says volumes, if you've never been around a high-performance person. If you work for General Electric and you never met Jack Welch, that's tragic. I know if I'd been at General Electric, I would have met the little shit. Just as when I was with the Onassis people, I met Konstantin Gratsos. I made it my endeavor, my goal to meet the guy, and he ultimately became my mentor and was my mentor for many, many years. But I've always seeked out, some people would say, trouble. Your parents, when they sent you to school the first day, if you don't remember, I'll remind you, stay out of trouble, eat your lunch, keep your clothes clean, Well, I think every parent, normally the mother, is given that talk to the kid when she walks him to school. In the school that I went to, the grammar school, the very grammar school I tried to kill my teacher in, 10, 12 years later, I still remember holding onto my mom's finger like this and walking to school. Now, I used to think the school was like 4 or 5 miles away, 3 blocks. But when you're a little kid, and I was never that little, 3 blocks, and so, but I didn't keep my head down. I didn't do all the aforementioned things that you would, as a loving parent, normally, a loving, nourishing parent, normally the mom, not always, but normally, I didn't do any of that shit. Because kids don't do what you tell them to do. They do what they see you do. And I saw my dad a fucking superhero. Like Superman. Which he was. So I wanted to emulate Superman. So I did a lot of stupid, in hindsight. Of course, hindsight's 2020. For those of you that have ever drunk to excess, you knew how you were going to feel the next day. If you didn't, you were a fucking moron, okay? But you drank anyway. This normally is associated with younger people, but some of you are still young enough to drink stupidly. Now, I've never done drugs to excess, so I don't know what that feels like. Although I had my first marijuana cookie a year and a half ago. I didn't know it was a marijuana cookie. And we went out to dinner. I was drinking it with red wine and the sweet, and we went out to dinner. Vinica, for those of you that have talked to Vinica. We were in Amsterdam, which getting a marijuana cookie is not that difficult in Amsterdam. And the food tasted, God, I ate 2 servings of bread. They had to bring butter 3 times. I mean, the water even tastes good. I couldn't understand it. And so Vinica and Sally started laughing. What's so goddamn funny? And then it dawned on me that the cannabis in the cookie, and I go, fuck, I weigh 500 pounds for sure. Maybe you get used to it. So I don't know what taking too many drugs it feels like, but I certainly do vis-a-vis alcohol. The Hall of Fame kids, which you can't see anymore because it's in the other room. And by the way, as I said last night, I love this new setup. The Hall of Fame kids, I didn't have to motivate anybody. Not last seminar, but the seminar before last. I went through all the Hall of Fame kids to think back upon my relationship with them. And every single one, to a man or a woman, I didn't have to motivate. Now that speaks volumes. Not one single one. Now, there's a difference between motivating and getting them back on the playing field. Because a number of them straight off the playing field, like in the famous scene of Forrest Gump when he's running the wrong way in the football field, I've had a number of those guys and gals. And I got them back, and they finally scored, so to speak, and then they're on the Hall of Fame. But vis-a-vis having to motivate them, not a one. And as Andrew Carnegie said about 120 years ago, there's 4 reasons for success. Financial motive must prevail, 1. Number 2, financial motive must prevail. Number 3, financial motive must prevail. And number 4, financial motive must prevail. Money talks and bullshit fucking walks. That's it. There is no other. Financial motive must prevail. Now, I knew that when I was 5 years old, in the hood. Financial motive must prevail. And now, of course, we have human resources which beg to differ with me. And they'll talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is horseshit. And that you need to be loved, which is horseshit. Mongolian ponies, which are arguably the strongest racing ponies in the world, they have 2 characteristics, and this is according to Mongol history or folklore. 1, they ride until they die, and 2, you don't have to cuddle them like other horses. You cuddle British horses, American, you cuddle, you'd be nice. Mongolian, they treat like mushrooms. They keep them in the dark and shit on them. They're a horse. Now, here I am, a person that I cry when I see dogs hurt, but I mean, I'm much more empathetic or sympathetic, which I don't have for humans, for animals. But there's no cuddling here. And the reason there was no cuddling, one of the primary reasons, is I've never been cuddled by a high-performance person in my fucking life. I was against hugging and kissing 50 years ago. Unless you've got big tits and you're blonde and you're on your back, don't fucking touch me. I hope we never go back to cuddling and kissing and all that shit. I'll be happy as fucking Larry.